Hey there YouTube. Well, from this angle, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you can see a big change, and that's that I've got the radiator physically in place. Now, you also can see that I don't actually have it bolted up to anything at this point. What Factory 5 tells you to do to start out is just put some zip ties up towards the top and the bottom. Unlike most cars on the Cobra, at least on this Cobra, their Cobras, I assume that the originals were similar. You have more than a 45-degree angle. Looks like about a 50-degree angle that the radiator is canted at to make it fit while getting a lot of surface area. So it's a bit of an unusual installation. Something that's also really unusual is that the body goes on, and then there are some aluminum panels that basically go through the nose and then support the radiator from the bottom. So when you're in the go-kart phase, you literally have the bottom portion of the radiator supported by zip ties. So before I actually start doing any go-karting with the car, I'm going to add some more zip ties. Really, I think I'm going to do that before I even put coolant in it, because that's going to be a lot of weight pushing down on it. But for now, that works. What I do need to do is drill the holes and put the bolts in up on the for the brackets up here. So I'll get that in. I'd sort of resisted putting the radiator in for a while because, as you've seen from previous videos, not having it there gives you a wonderful access to everything on the front of the engine just by walking forward. But I'm basically done with that. Not 100%, but pretty close. So let's get to the real point of the video. So today, I spent time finishing up my fuel lines, and I'm going to make a couple of points and talk about a few lessons learned here. So if you have been watching some of the previous videos, originally I was going to put my fuel filter sort of back here. Then after kinking one of the lines, I decided that what would work better would be to move the filter forward, and then that would let me put in a short section of line that would have a bend in it, which would let me get this piece of line further away from that piece of metal. So this works perfectly. A note about this location, it's really not ideal. I'm going to stick with it, mainly because this is a filter that's pretty easily serviceable. All I'm going to have to do is essentially unscrew this here to change out the cartridge. So provided that the filter housing itself doesn't start leaking, I should never have to replace it. That said, this is not an ideal mounting location. I basically won't be able to get this out once the car is fully assembled without destroying these Adele clamps, and then I won't be able to rivet it back in. It's riveted up there. So one thing I'm actually going to do, to get the rivet it, I actually had to come in from up here, the footwell area, which is going to have aluminum on it, and then put the rivet gun down there. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drill out these aluminum rivets and replace them with stainless steel, just to have something in there that's a little bit tougher and going to last longer, hopefully. Reality is, for how this car is going to get used, I'm not concerned about it. But I'm going to show you another location that I'd considered as well, and talk about why I decided to leave it here. I got a hole here because I had to drill out a rivet for where I originally had the line, so I got to fill that with silicone, try to keep stuff from getting inside the frame. And then I ran the line up, and I'll change position here so you can see what happened next. But from there, the line goes forward, and then on that cross member there. I need to put a couple more clamps in, but I figured what I'm going to do is wait on that until basically wait on that until I get to the point of having the cooling lines in, cooling hoses in. I also stole the -6 female connector off of here so that I could finish up the high pressure side. This side's good, so I'm just going to get the connector, put one more clamp in down there, then the return side's going to be done. Obviously I got to put a plug in there too. But really the fuel lines at this point are effectively done. I also have to make a hose, obviously, but I wanted to wait on that until I got the cooling hoses in to make it more obvious where the hose for this should or should not go. Also wanted to put in my brackets for my ignition coils because I think that'll provide a little bit of restriction as well, so that'll help to bound the routing. So lessons learned on the hard lines. So if you're like me, you know, most mechanics don't have to do work with hard lines all that often. It's kind of a fabrication thing. If you work on old cars where the hard lines are bad from age and rust and things, maybe you deal with this more often, but you know, most people don't. And this is really a good angle to show that, because you've got this brake line, this brake crossover line, which I normally don't want to spend time looking at it. This side's okay, but this side really looks terrible. I mean, I'll be completely honest on it, and actually the video makes it look better than it is. But this was one of this crossover line was one of the first ones that I did, and by comparison, this hard line for the fuel is literally the last line that I did, and you can see that this looks a whole lot better. So a couple of things I learned. First one is start at the back of the car, and I'm going to walk back here, and this will be pretty obvious why. So if you start at the back of the car with your brake lines, you can't even see them in here. It's almost nobody is ever going to see the brake lines and the fuel lines back here. So this is really the point, the place where you should start doing your hardline bending and make your mistakes, where if something's going to look bad, it's fine, because as long as it's functional, that's really what matters. You know, under the hood, anytime I open the hood, that brake line is going to be very visible, and it bothers me enough that I might even replace it. I'm probably not going to replace it now, but I think what'll probably happen is at some point in the future, you know, when one of the brake calipers goes bad and I have to open up the system and I'm going to have to re-bleed it anyway, that's probably going to be when I'm going to redo that line. If I'd started at the back, you know, and the reality is my back lines actually look pretty good. You can't see it from here, but by the time I'd gotten back there, I'd gotten okay at it. So if I'd started at the back and sort of did my learning there, then by the time I got to the front, they would look okay. Another thing I learned is that I'll show you the tool that I used that you might have seen in other videos. I think I may have shown it off before, but this is the tubing bender I used. This works fine for the smaller sizes, the 3/16 and the 1/4 inch, but if you take a look, the radius that it has is the same on all sizes of tubing. The problem is by the time you get to the 5/16, and especially if you got to the 3/8, but if you're following the kit and using the hard lines that come with the kit, 5/16 is the biggest. This is not a big enough radius to bend a 5/16 hard line without kinking it. And I ran into that a couple of times. For the smaller lines like the brake lines, it does do okay, but the reality is this final line that I did here was 100% done by hand. My opinion, and I talked to a couple of friends of mine who work on older cars a lot and actually have to spend more time doing hardline bending, is that doing the bending manually is probably the best way to go in a lot of cases. I mean, the tool can be okay, but in my case, I definitely kinked several lines that I wouldn't have kinked otherwise, and specifically the 5/16 lines, but I think that I even kinked a 1/4 inch line or two, if I'm remembering correctly. These 3/16 are okay. I mean, I made a fairly complicated bend over here using the tool, and that worked out. But if I could do it again, I probably wouldn't have bought the tool, or maybe I would have bought the tool and just only used it for the 3/16. So I guess the real summary: start at the back of the car, work your way forward. Maybe use the tool, but definitely not on the 5/16. At least if you're going with that Harbor Freight tool. And bending by hand is probably a good way to consider going. Okay, so back to the fuel filter. Another place I'd considered putting the fuel filter was actually up here on the cross member. And the thing that would have been nice about this is it would have been a whole lot more serviceable from the perspective of being able to actually get at the filter and potentially replace it. Now, I say that, but as I'm looking at this, if it's on this side, then the cooling hose coming out of the water pump and going to the radiator would be right on top of it. So it might not actually be too much better. Probably over there would have been better still if I'd gotten my lengths correct. But even then, you could really question how much better off you would be there, because where I have it, I can just put the car on the lift and get it opened up and replace my filter element really easily. I mean, if you take a look, you know, this wouldn't take me long at all to do in service. I just gotta undo this, pull it out, put a wrench on, unscrew this, pull the filter cartridge out, put it back together. That's quick. It's on there, just kind of coming over here. I'd have a much harder time getting wrenches on it over here, or I'd be reaching down through the top. So really, this area would be easier if I got to the point of having to physically replace the entire filter assembly, but probably not easier for normal service. If you go with what Factory 5 tells you, I think they suggest that you put the filter somewhere back in this general area near the rear axle, which is not too far from where it is on the Mustangs from the factory. I mean, I guess this is sort of serviceable. There's not a great place to put it no matter what. So I'm not going to tell you where you should put it. And in fact, even in the manual, Factory 5 doesn't really tell you where to put the filter. They're also assuming that you're using the stock filter that the Mustang had, which I am not. But just a couple of things for you to think about as you're doing your lines and your routing. Hopefully this is helpful for people. So next for me, I got to buy some hardware so I can mount the coil packs. And then the other big thing is I have to start actually running the coolant hoses. I do need to get a filler neck of some sort. I don't have one of those. I'm going to get an inline filler neck, and then I'm going to have to get a couple more of... Let me show you these couplers that Factory 5 gives you. So Factory 5 gives you 4 of these, and then they give you this long stainless steel pipe, and then basically you can just cut it anywhere you want to get it to the length you want. So these couplers come with inserts. I have no idea what these smaller ones fit on. Maybe it's on the earlier 5.0 Mustangs, but it certainly doesn't fit on anything that I have. So there's those on the inside, and then you have, let's see if I can find another one here that shows you better. But, well, here's one that's untouched. So you can see here's the really small diameter, and then on this side there's a bigger diameter, but then you also have this insert piece that you can pull out, and then you have the hose clamps to tighten it down. So a couple things I'm noticing is that one thing I'm noticing so far is that the only thing that these go onto easily is this metal pipe. It doesn't go on to the radiator particularly easily, doesn't go on to the thermostat housing particularly easily. Definitely doesn't go onto my water pump easily, but one of the things I've noticed is that the water pump is actually the water pump outlet's a slightly larger diameter than what this pipe is. So that's part of the problem there. So I'll get it on. I will say these do seem like a good, high quality, tough, piece of rubber. So one of those things that for something like this, if it's hard to get on, it's probably going to do a good job once it's on there. So that's the next thing, and then I got to go buy the hardware to put those brackets on and mount the coils on, and then I'm going to be getting to the point where probably the next thing after I get those done is going to be starting on the HVAC, so that I can finish up all the hard stuff that has fixed locations, and getting all that finalized before I move on to the electrical. So hopefully you found some of those tips and tricks helpful if you're at the point of working on your factory 5 car and getting to the fuel and brake lines, or it's something that you're looking at having to do somewhere in the future if you're planning on buying one or just bought one but haven't got it yet. I will definitely say that those brake lines and fuel lines are the least pleasant part of the whole project that I've done so far. And that's just because I don't like hard lines. In my previous videos, in one of them, I did say how I don't like messing with hard lines. One thing I will say, there's a couple of people out there who will sell you kits that have pre-bent lines. Everything's perfect, and you can just bolt them right in. You could go that way, but you're going to spend a few $100 or more. I forget how much they cost exactly to do that. I had to buy some more lines, but I think maybe I'm in at $30 for the extra lines that I've had to buy. So not too much money. And the only reason I had to buy extra lines was because I kinked some. What Factory 5 provides really is sufficient to do the job. So I would do it the same way that I did. I definitely would not have gone out and bought the pre-made lines, but without a doubt I do have that one brake line that is going to bug me until I eventually replace it. So anyway, hope you found this helpful. Please do subscribe if you find this the least bit interesting. Got over 200 subscribers now, which I'm really happy about. Hoping to get 1,000 subscribers sometime this year, and if you could help get towards that goal, we'd appreciate it. So thanks, and have a good day. See ya.